overarching thing to place a lot of different ideas in this bucket. I've done a lot of work recently on sustainable livelihoods, and we're going to have to design sustainable livelihoods for at least another 1 billion people by 2025. And that's, of course, an enormous number. So what are we talking about? You probably can't read these. A lot of these are just quotes that I put up because I am still distilling what is important. Anyway, you have to have tangible assets. You have to be able to make claims. You have to be able to protect yourself from shocks and from known disasters that are going to happen, such as droughts. And also to recover from stress and provide for future generations. So all of these are critical sustainability, but we're looking at it in the area of people who share the same hearth, or the same cooking, or the family unit. And here's just a population graph. So a lot of people to see, and I'm going to put these, of course, up on the wiki, so you can read a lot of the things as to what it means to be sustainable, what it means to be alive. I mean, it's very common. Of course, people write whole journal articles on it, and I'm trying to distill it, and I'm not sure it's completely bullet pointed yet. But this is just talking about what that last slide meant. Resource productivity on the long term, sustainable livelihoods through land ownership, livestock, trees, grazing rights, fishing, hunting. And mainly in this work that I'm doing, I'm talking about rural populations based on the 8 United Nations Millennium Goals that 193 countries agreed upon. So that we're working on areas that are poverty-stricken in one way or another. So what this presentation is talking about, how do you understand the implications of technologies that's inserted into a rural environment, whether that technology is management-oriented or whether it's genetically modified seeds. So, genetically modified organisms, this is what started me off on this particular track, are patentable seeds that use some kind of genetically modified organism within them. You can't patent a seed, but you could patent certain genetic engineering activities, and since these genetic engineering activities occur in the seed, you can now patent the seed. So Monsanto Corporation is the largest producer of genetically modified seeds in the world, and they have intellectual property rights on those seeds. So most of the ones at this time, this research was like 3 years old, they're resistant to most herbicides, not all. They require dependable water. For example, drip irrigation, when that exists, is a very positive way to sustain these kinds of crops. They require money to purchase the fertilizers, the pesticides, and the seeds. And it's been somewhat of an ultimate disaster in a lot of rural India, because only where the environment does not support these problems. But in any case, it's not a sustainable option as far as environmental, these genetically modified seeds, even though they do yield better crops. Okay, so in the Indian countryside, you have small plot farmers. The seeds are not drought resistant, and so if you're depending on rainfall and monsoons, and you have delayed rainfall and delayed monsoons, then your seeds die and you can't recover. You have to borrow money. And you have to also borrow money for the fertilizers, the pesticides, the seeds. Many times you can't pay this money back, and if it happens to be the mortgages and the seeds and the loans happen to be secured by thumbprint, it appears to be convenient to kill yourself in order that your family can continue to survive, because then they can't enforce it. Okay, so I'm using Richard Watson's frameworks on sustainability. Let me just go to the next slide. It's just this one. So a matrix of preventing pollution, stewardship, and clean technology are the issues of sustainability that he talks about. And he talks about at these three levels: individual, organization, societal. And I don't know how to go back there. So let me just go back. So to prevent pollution, he means emissions, effluents, and waste. Product stewardship, reduce pollution and minimize adverse environmental effects. The cradle-to-cradle concept, and clean technology, no harmful emissions or waste. So those are the issues. So I took this, I didn't do it, I assigned it, and got my students, who are all those co-authors. Not all of them did it very well, but the ones that did, and that I used work from, are these co-authors, this paper, and they were happy to do it. I hope I get the paper. So I asked them to look at bitter seeds, a review of bitter seeds. That was bitter seeds is part of a trilogy by Michael Peled. The movies they're not really distributed. They're not really distributed in many theaters everywhere. But the first one was Star Wars, about Walmart's devastation of retail in areas where they moved in. And congratulations, you've been globalized. If Walmart moves right in next door to you. China Blue is about blue jeans sweatshops in India and or in China. And this bitter seeds is about the Monsanto genetically modified organism. So I asked them to look at this. Look at the Watson framework, and look at two other videos. One, Uris's microeconomics, and another one that dealt with microeconomics and building nets in Tanzania. And to put this all together into the framework, because if you could see what are the implications of a technology insertion, and you could add the information concepts on top of it, and we could help. That's the sort of assumption of training. So this unreadable chart talks about, but it's unreadable, but and I tried my best, it's pretty good. So, but on the individual and the pollution prevention, it talks about what the natural seeds do. There are no emissions, no influence, no waste, and what happens to the GMO seeds, where they need chemicals to help them grow. The distribution, capturing information networks does not really exist. They're not really well trained. And the natural seeds here on product stewardship, you can recycle them. There's no waste. They're reusable. The GMOs are not recyclable. They're sterile, and if they're not, they're made to be sterile by Monsanto. And here in clean technology, they're natural. They're recyclable. They adapt to changing climate. Pesticides are used, but not that much. Mostly they're weeded by hand, or they were. And of course the GMOs, they're not acceptable to changing climate growth. The pesticides, they're not resistant to all pests, just some, like boll weevils they're resistant to, but other pests they're not. So they use things like Roundup, which is a really hostile pesticide to support those seeds because they're no longer weeding them by hand. So it's been a disaster, and it's been a disaster on almost all of these levels because they're not supported properly. Okay. So sometimes, however, technology insertion does work, and this is a case study of creating community-based enterprises, and I've heard a lot of talk about this sort of different sorts of organizations here. It's a promising basis towards an alternative entrepreneurial mode for sustainability, enhancing livelihoods and promoting socioeconomic development in rural India. This is in the journal Small Business and Entrepreneurship. So what Tori is looking for is an alternate way to create entrepreneur indications and efforts and activities where the Western model doesn't work. The Western model is an individual who goes out, gets an idea, Facebook, creates something on their own. the main wish is economic gain. And these are not sustainable actions and they don't work. The projects that people try this way in rural areas all over the world don't work. So she's trying this way and it worked. On the, why am I going backward? That's really interesting. I don't know. I'll move over here. I love going backwards, but not right now.
Now you're there.
Okay. So, so this is what's wrong with Western ideas, and here we move on to a community enterprise, which is an autonomous association of persons united voluntarily to meet their common social, economic, and cultural needs. And as opposed to, say, a co-op, where a bunch of people, producers in a single area, get together and sell things. So this is the whole.
Yeah, listen, I think your arrow was just on that arrow. See how it's backwards and forward now? So you just move your mouse away from there. Try it again. Move away. Move away somewhere else. And then click.
Okay, so what this company does is supplies medicinal herbs to Indian pharmaceutical enterprises, and it's the intermediate between the farmers, which are mainly women, that gather the herbs and create some of the phytoethnomedicines, and the pharmaceuticals who sell them. And it's a co-op, so to speak. Mm-hmm. But because we have this organization and we have this management skills behind it, it's been very successful. $390 is a lot annually. It's over $1 a day to 1,300 families in these areas of India. The article is 2011, but the research was done. I couldn't determine if that date was current or not. But in any case, it's been successful. So she did a content analysis of, I think, 68 interviews across the different areas of management, and these were the 5 categories that came up with: capacity building, access to resources, changes in social status of women, economic development, and participation in decision making. These are what has come out of this endeavor, according to the people in the endeavor. And coincidentally enough, that's very close to what a livelihood is. It's creating livelihoods in these areas. And they're supported by management and technology and appropriate information. Monsanto, on the other hand, this very strange guy, a sociologist and an attorney or something, Bosch and Gill, had this having or doing intellectual property rights, transgenic seeds on the edge between refeudalization and naturalization. He considers naturalization what seeds used to be, where you could create your own seeds, you could give them to your friends, you could replant them, and the refeudalization where Monsanto had total control of the farmers who are using those seeds. And they have total control not only just technologically, but informationally, and also the fact they haven't signed an agreement, a technology use agreement. So if they don't copy it, any farmer who wants to buy seeds has to sign this, and they have 5 issues that they have to do. You can't save seeds. You're insured against failure. But you also have to buy their complementary herbicide, which is Roundup Weathermax, which is Roundup is one of those very, very hostile pesticides. You have to, if you don't buy that, you have to pledge to follow ecological and segregation requirements. That means you can't let your seeds go someplace else and germinate your neighbor's seed. As a matter of fact, they are suing some of the neighboring farmers for kidnapping. And the other side is suing them for assault on their crops. So, but as you can see, they're refeudalizing farms because they're completely dependent on them. So, anyway, yes, all right. So the conclusions that I would come to is that these kinds of frameworks are useful and they're necessary. The one that we were using was on the basis of the individual, the organization, and society, which is probably the wrong level when you're talking about at least the United Nations Millennium Goals. Probably it would be better to use the household as the smallest unit, or the livelihood, and the next unit maybe the community or the subgroup, and the third level might be the societal good. So that's any comments.
First of all, I think it's just so fascinating that they turned off the ability of these seeds to reproduce. There's something very maniacal about that, for sure. But obviously, they're still very successful companies. So, but
yes.
where are these seeds doing well?
Huge farming. What do you call it? Kind of farming in a huge area.
A factory farm.
Factory farms. Yeah, they're very useful in factory farms. And in some cases in India, where they have the management to get grants and create drip irrigation systems, they'll work there as well. I mean, you have to do something because you have to create livelihoods, and at least they have to eat, whether or not they're happy or not. So it works in those areas. Whether it works over the long term, that's a good question. It doesn't look to me, from what I've read so far, as though it does. But of course, this kind of, all the research we're doing is so interdisciplinary that you end up behind the curve of about 6 different disciplines.
Yeah. I mean, certainly intellectual property is a fascinating way to look at this.
Yes.
But that's now you're coming to create another discipline
Yes.
of the law.
Yes.
So,
So you couldn't patent a Harvard mouse, but you can patent the seeds because they patented the component of the seed.
probably the sequence, the DNA sequence. Yeah.
So it's not that they're not providing lots of corn for lots of high fructose corn syrup cheaper on fewer acres. That's possible.
Yeah. Is it cheaper when you take into account the fact that you cannot reproduce the seeds?
Well, if you take
they probably don't take that into consideration, just as strictly
cost
cost-benefit analysis, one time only.
Well, I think they have something you can spray the seeds with that will turn back on the reproduce. I wish I had somebody here to know more about it.
Yeah.
I don't think there's inherently anything in the science that says that they have to create plants that don't reproduce.
No, I think
I think it's
It's
Yes.
And also how many nutrients it takes, minerals it takes from the ground, and how do you put back in new nutrients?
The whole
I'm not an agriculturalist.
Right.
It's, for farmers, it's the idea of fellow farming,
Right.
what farmers do.
That one's not a study with a Canadian study, by the way. I don't know if they can do the same thing in the United States.
And the question of short term, middle term, the question is long term for whom? I mean, for if you're talking of big business, it's long term for them. But who counts as important here?
I don't know.
That's
They
the
could
issue
have
of
mind.
profitable for whom?
Yes.
Right. Yeah, for the government, yes, because they have taxes, but for local people, do they count? And this is where what puts the finger of how important are local people. And that is the key issue. And also is the anonymous, really. One farmer is as good as another farmer.
Mm-hmm.
So the for whom is the key question of long-term, short-term, middle-term. Just on another point, what do you think of which is since we've used in inner cities in North America and industrial countries of asset mapping? Asset mapping says that when you go to a community where something is difficult, you don't ask what is the problem. You ask what works for you. What are the signs of hope? What are the activities that give you hope for the future? Mm-hmm. And you work on the minor elements, what's called the weak signals of the community. Could be gathering around the water pump. Mm-hmm. And you develop what people feel is meaningful for them without any judgment. Yeah. And you develop around core, meaningful, hope-giving activities, rather than the medical metaphor is where does it hurt, I'll treat where it hurts, and I'll ignore what doesn't hurt.
Right.
So asset mapping comes around from a positive message, but not the positive or, I've got a magic wand. It's working on what works, whether it's religious, whether it's superstition. If it works, it works. And apparently, I don't know if people know here, but that's been quite sustainable as an approach to working with people in terms of their meaning reference, not our meaning missionary reference of what they should be working, which has...
By the way, and I just want to say, one of the reasons I used those two cases together was because the first one, the problem was they didn't have the information, they didn't have the technology.
Yeah.
The second one they do, but they managed still to misuse it.
I think it's really interesting at the theoretical level what you're doing, and I think it would be interesting if, I don't know if you've gone back to the previous generation of work with these plants, because in the 1960s,
the hybrid.
Norman Borlaug has worked with shuttle breeding and developing a little hybrid plants in Mexico, and then that's that went out to India and Pakistan and other countries. But at that time, there's a lot of criticism about monoculture and damages. But at that time, but there was a community. I guess this is the next to. I haven't read this book, but the community, the scientists at that time globally did share and exchange what they knew.
Yes.
And this was pre-GM. I think it would be interesting actually if you looked at that, because there's sort of intermediary layers that have been taken away, but is there potential for some kind of...
Yeah. Well, there's enormous potential to help or to create more livelihoods and more food and more opportunities. And we're going to need 3 times as many livelihoods by the end of this century than we have now. And now we're just losing jobs all over the place. Jobs, much less livelihood. So something has to be done in the huge inner cities as well. So that we can...
I think we're getting
There's a company in India called ITC, which is a subsidiary of British Tobacco. I think I don't know if this has been written up, but I read a report about it. Like 15 years back, they set up kiosks in rural India. So where they would share seed prices. So the farmers can actually look for the lowest prices and all, buy the seeds. And then they could market their crops also. So, so that was really positive. I don't know whether it was an IDC actually set up the kiosk, and this is information basically. These people didn't have any access to information. They had no idea what the seeds cost or what the crops cost. And that was a very, very positive experience actually. So I don't know whether it
I was open to that too, yes, and some
it was like 40, 50 years back.
Okay. Thank you.